listener production.
In May 2009, the AFP received word of a complex international corruption racket. A banknote production company, half owned by the Australian Reserve Bank, had allegedly bribed foreign officials in exchange for the right to produce their nation's currency. Federal Officer Rohan Pike never would have expected the vast global scale of the investigation. Bribes worth millions, a string of dramatic Melbourne raids, and tension between Rohan, the AFP, and the ever-powerful Australian Reserve Bank. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives.
That operation started when I was in a financial investigations team. That team was the recipient of AUSTRAC reports, suspicious transfers and the like. AUSTRAC would send them off to the AFP and that team would massage those and determine whether there was any offences or whether there was any cases that were worth pursuing. One of them that came through were these dozens of transfers to Belize. They were structured, which means just under the reporting limit of $10,000. But of course, if you're sending dozens of $9,900 out in cash transfers, then that does raise suspicion. So, and it did in this case. We looked at that. We realised there were false names, the structured amounts, and most of them were going to Belize and some ended up going to Lebanon. So the structuring offence is not a terribly exciting offence. It is an offence, but it's really just an indicator of something else that's going on. And I decided that it was more interesting to find out where that money was generated. So I went to look behind that and found that there was a tiny little duty-free store out in the northern suburbs of Melbourne called Worldwide Duty Free, who were buying millions of duty-free cigarettes. And they weren't doing really much trade at the shop that we saw or buying anything else. So really that money had to be generated from the duty-free cigarettes. So we ended up getting customs on board with us, who looked after the tobacco sales and the collection of duty at that time. And I managed to expand the team of one to a team of about 15. And we spent a couple of years looking into worldwide duty free. We sort of finally worked out that they weren't sending them overseas as their methodology would suggest, but in fact they were diverting them into the local market and saving on that duty that they didn't have to pay.
Just for my clarity, Rohan, the money-making aspect of this venture, is it as simple as saying that they were buying cigarettes at wholesale price, selling them into a local market without having to pay excise and things such as that? Is that where their big profit margin was, Rohan?
Yeah, that's right. They were buying the cigarettes locally. Back in 1999, you were able to buy cigarettes duty-free directly from the manufacturers, who did have a manufacturing industry in Australia then. They don't now. But you could buy them duty-free on the promise that you would sell them overseas. So either to travellers, where you used to turn up to a duty-free store with your passport and your ticket as evidence that you were going overseas, and then you'd be allowed the duty-free price. So they were buying millions of cigarettes on that premise that they were getting travellers, and or they decided a better scheme, because they could do it in bulk, was to get orders allegedly coming from overseas. So they had, as I said, just a cannon trawling through overseas phone books in Singapore and Hong Kong and a number of countries, and then purporting to be those people sending faxed orders to the store in Australia and then having payments from overseas being sent to the store as payment for those goods. Of course, we found out that the faxed orders were being sent from Melbourne to Melbourne and that the money that was overseas had already been sent there by them as previous profits. So it was just a circuitous route for the money that was purported to be money for these orders.
And just on that, when we're talking about the profits here, I mean, some of the figures that are quite staggering. Initially, the scale of this operation was worth about $20 million. Now, this is back in 1999, and you equated that in today's terms, the excise for tobacco would be about $100 million. I'm just interested in the actual markup from what they were purchasing these cigarettes, these illicit cigarettes, and then redistributing. What sort of a markup are we looking at? I mean, there must be some big money involved. And of course, this is a large-scale operation. They're not just bringing in 2 or 3 cartons of cigarettes. They're bringing in millions. But what sort of a markup are they getting from the purchase through distribution around Melbourne?
The typical markup was about half, was about in the middle of between what the legitimate price was being sold for legal cigarettes, fully duty paid in the shops, and these ones that they were purchasing, which were duty free. So they were saving, back then the duty was only 20 cents a cigarette. So for a carton of cigarettes, which housed 200 cigarettes, they were saving at least $40 on that, and they were making $30 saving on each carton. These days, the excise is $1.30 per cigarette. So for the 100 million cigarettes that they purchased duty-free, had that scheme been in operation today, they'd make 130 million in the year. That's just in the evasion of that excise. And obviously we know that is happening these days, and that's what the illicit market's based on, is the difference between the legal price and the duty-free or excise-free price. So we had a crew who were doing the collection of the logistics, I guess, getting the distribution of these cigarettes out from the store. They spent most of their time working on the distribution. We had a guy called Justin Cannon. He was organising faxed orders, which were reported to be from overseas to the store, hundreds and hundreds of orders. And what he would do was go through overseas phone books and just write down the names and addresses and put them on these faxed orders to the shop, saying that, I want 100 cartons of Marlboro or something. But really he was just doing it from his own home or another office in Melbourne. And then, of course, the fax header would have the location of the origin of the fax, so they would have to cut those off. That's one of the easiest bits of deception that they did. Justin also sent off the cash to Belize. They got a bit wind that someone might have been looking at all those cash transfers at one stage, so they changed their money laundering methodology and somehow hooked up with a guy called Nicola Ciconti, who was a member of the mafia, and he's since passed away. But he came on board with his brother and a guy from Sydney called Donald Thompson, who's a bit of a character. We'll come to him a bit later. But those 4 decided to start sending cash strapped to their bodies overseas to Hong Kong and to Lebanon, trying to evade detection or reporting from Austrac through that methodology. Of course, they needed someone at Australian Air Express. That was a critical part of their scam, where they had to pretend that these goods were going overseas. So they actually had an insider at Australian Air Express who was busy manufacturing 20,000 false invoices and having that false data plugged into their computers in an attempt to show that those goods were going offshore, when of course they weren't. So they went to some serious length to disguise what was going on. It was pretty sophisticated, so it took us a little while to work out what was going on. We tried static surveillance on their factory with cameras, but they actually found the cameras and then stole the tapes that we were using, the old VHS tapes. We bugged their phones, but they were too good to actually say too much over the phones. We did some garbage runs, which is an old police tactic to collect some intelligence. That proved useful. Nicola Ciconti's brother was sort of the runt of the litter, so we targeted his house a bit. But he was throwing out international bank transfers or copies of them, so that gave us a really good heads up of where the money was going and who was involved. But eventually we worked out that the key to proving it was proving that the cigarettes were being sold in the local market. And we worked out that we could intercept the cigarettes between the time that they ordered them of the cigarette companies and then the companies delivering the cigarettes. So this happened. They would order them on one day, they would be sent to a factory where they'd be housed overnight and then delivered the next morning. And so with the permission of the cigarette companies, we accessed those cigarettes overnight and we marked those cartons with invisible ink and then repackaged them, sent them on their way. And the idea was that we would go out to the marketplace later and then try and buy them back and see if our marks were on them. And of course, none of those products were supposed to be sold in Australia. They were supposed to, according to the company, they were all being sent offshore. It didn't take us too long to work out that we could buy them back in the marketplace, and we knew that we were on a winner, I guess.
Can you just tell us about this invisible link? I'm just loving that link. And to be fair, played a very important part in following the track of these illicit cigarettes.
Really, we just had these pens that you could write on the outside of these cartons, the plastic wrappers, and we would go one night and put double X on it, or the next double zero or something, and obviously make note of the dates that we were doing this, and we'd cover the whole. There'd be 10,000 or more cartons in an order that we would access, crack open the boxes, pull out all the cartons and mark one or both ends of them with this ink. And then the way that you could actually see it was through an ultraviolet light. So when we went out to the shops, we would have a look at the display. Back then you could actually have cigarettes out on display, and we'd pick up a carton and put the ultraviolet light over each end of it, and the ink would show up if it was one of our cartons.
Rohan, this was a 2-year operation, and I think, pull me up if I got this wrong, you went sort of from one person looking at this up to a team of 15. Is that, again, just to paint the picture for those listening in, is that a full-time 2 years devoted purely to this, or is it something that you're working on alongside other operations, or is this a full-on sort of 40, 50-hour week, 10 to 15 staff for 2 years to bring this operation to a conclusion?
Yes, it was a full-on 40-hour week minimum for all those staff. As I say, it was a joint operation between customs staff and the AFP back then. I get that you're hinting that this is a large expense and numerous resources and staff are being expended on this operation, and I agree. I guess the point of why we spent so many resources doing it is that we saw that this methodology could be repeated. We were desperate to stamp it out, to gain enough evidence so that these people could go to jail and be punished severely, so that would lay a marker for anyone else who were thinking of launching into a similar type of crime. Of course, it probably did deter some people from going into that tobacco crime at that time, duty-free fraud. And of course, we would make recommendations at the end of such an investigation to the authorities, saying how they could perhaps tighten up their policy settings in order to avoid this in the future. And of course, the duty-free cigarette buying in Australia finished shortly after that. Eventually, Mohammed Nazir, who was one of the keys, he confessed to the whole story and gave us that whole story, and that proved our allegations to be true. Donald Thompson, who was sending the money offshore, he was an absolute classic character, your classic con man who had been involved in all sorts of crimes in his long life. I think he was in his late 60s. But we had his phone tapped, and we realised that he was terribly embarrassed about being caught and arrested for this, and he didn't want anyone else in his building to know about it. So we spoke to him and said, "We're going to have to talk to your friend down the hall here, because you're not talking to us and no one else is. So we're going to have to ask them what you've been up to for these last few years. And of course, he was so embarrassed by that he decided to confess to us instead. We typed up a 60-page statement, which again was some great evidence against his co-conspirators. We handed that out to all of the other accused. A week later, Donald Thompson fell out of his fourth floor apartment window and died on the footpath below. The New South Wales Police, obviously, he was Sydney based. They went and wrote that off as an accident. He was allegedly washing the outside of the window when he fell, and he was found on the footpath in a puddle of water with a squeegee in his hand. And so that sort of sounds humorous now, but at the time it was pretty serious. We knew that he was involved, in these. It was over a $20 million case. He'd just confessed to it. He'd dobbed in all of his co-conspirators, some of whom allegedly in the mafia. And a week after his confession was distributed, he was found dead. So we asked the New South Wales Police to have another look at that, which they supposedly did, and still came back with the fact that it was an accident as far as they were concerned. His wife doesn't believe that to this day, but anyway, that was Donald Thompson, which was pretty interesting. Other things that happened, we went to Lebanon. We got half of the money that was sent there, some $6 million, I think, was seized by the Lebanese authorities, and we went 50-50 with them. That was about the first time that we'd struck a deal with a foreign country over proceeds of crime. The guy at Australian Air Express, his dream in life was to become a policeman, actually. And soon after his activities in this crime, he joined the police, and we arrested him at the police college out in Mount Waverley. We had to pull him out of class in one of the last weeks of his course, and to arrest him, he wasn't terribly thrilled with that. I was personally threatened by some of these crooks, so they were pretty serious types, and they knew my home address, so I took it a bit seriously. It turned out that El Mustafa's son had been deliberately placed in the police credit co-op, which is the banking union that almost all police in Victoria put their money through. So he had access to everyone's bank accounts and home addresses in the police force. And that was the sort of type of corruption that these guys would participate in.
What ends up happening to those involved in something like this back in 1999? And has that changed at all today? Would you get a stiffer sentence today than back then? How does that sit?
Back then we were charging them with a fraud offence. So again, it was loosely based on the cigarettes were the methodology, but they were defrauding the government of that duty to the tune of 20 million. So they were charged, I think it was 29D back in the day in the old Commonwealth Crimes Act, and they would have got a couple of years each, which is it was a 10-year maximum offence. But as you say before, had it been a heroin or a cocaine or a methamphetamine these days, where the maximum penalty for this, commercial quantities is life, that may have been far more severe. But that's one of the reasons why criminals are attracted to tobacco. It's a pretty low risk and high profit crime type.
How does that sit now, Rohan? Has that changed in any way now for investigators, Australian Federal Police and others? If this was happening today, would there be additional charges that could be laid alongside those Crimes Act fraud offences, or is it basically the same now as it was back then?
It hasn't changed much, unfortunately. This is part of the job that I do now, is trying to advise policymakers that we need further offences, specific, illicit tobacco-related offences. Certainly here in Victoria, we don't have the word illicit tobacco in any of the statutes at all. The Victoria Police, to their credit, have started a task force, and they're doing the best they can, but they often try to not manufacture an offence, but try to place an old offence onto this new methodology with possession of stolen property or some sort of proceeds of crime offence. They're really trying to put a square peg in a round hole without the proper legislative template of illicit tobacco to help their inquiries, but it's much needed.
Coming up, the Australian link to an international corruption network influencing the production of foreign currency.
Some of the people who you would have to go through to get permission to seek evidence or gather evidence in these foreign countries were in fact the people who were accused of the crimes, which quickly put a stop to our inquiries in those countries.
Your most significant and one of the highest profile assignments came in and around 2009. You were appointed Senior Investigating Officer of Operation Rune, which was a major foreign bribery investigation targeting 2 Reserve Bank companies. Can you discuss this operation and your involvement in it?
Foreign bribery legislation came into effect in this country in 1999 after we signed up to an international convention. And the AFP were given responsibility for enforcing that piece of legislation. Obviously, business practices overseas, it was commonplace to need to pay bribes in order to get contracts at that point. A whistleblower came to the AFP alleging that the 2 Reserve Bank-owned firms that make our money, Securency, who produce the polymer, and Note Printing Australia, who put the letters and numbers on that polymer, were bribing overseas politicians in order to get contracts to produce their money. Not a lot of evidence was provided by the whistleblower, sort of a pretty loose allegation. At that time, the case was shelved. Then came the 23rd of May 2009, where The Age had on the front page the allegation that the Reserve Bank were bribing foreign officials around the world in order to gain these contracts. And of course, on the same day, the Reserve Bank then referred it back to the AFP. The case was commenced and it became it was said to be a priority investigation for the AFP. It was given to a small team in the Melbourne office who were perhaps unsure as to how much priority the case was actually going to be given, and realised that there were sensitivities politically with that sort of investigation. So they were sort of hesitant in order to go a full-blown investigation and do all the things that the police would normally do, like search warrants and so on, in order to gather some evidence. So 6 months later, in November 1999, I was acting in the superintendent chair, sitting above that investigation, and was asked to review it and let the Commissioner know that we hadn't actually collected any evidence of the offence by that stage. This was 6 months in. Cut a long story short, I was asked to then lead that investigation, and that team of 3 became a team of 20 under my command then, and we started to collect evidence with the help of the Reserve Bank, fortunately, who were cooperating with us.
Rohan, this goes from being a lower level, let's have a look at it, to becoming a pretty major investigation. 20 staff assisted by the Reserve Bank. Goodness, I would have no doubt that you came up against a plethora of different challenges leading that type of investigation. Can you give us just a bit of a feel for some of those?
Yeah, you're right. It was a very sensitive investigation, obviously, into the Reserve Bank. The politics of it were front and centre, and it was on the front page of the paper every day. We were wondering each day whether it would be above the fold or below the fold on the front page. That's how much coverage we had. It sort of put me under quite a bit of pressure. But some of the challenges we had were obviously the resources. It was unheard of to have a fraud case or a case of this nature to have 20 staff on it. So I was always under pressure to justify those resources, but managed to do so. The legislation itself was untested because we'd obviously never been to court. No one had ever been charged with it. So gathering the correct evidence was one of those challenges. The evidence collection internationally, obviously foreign bribery, putting the foreign into it. Obviously some of the evidence is going to be overseas. And that evidence, as I said in the last case, is usually primarily collected through the use of mutual legal assistance. And those go through diplomatic and formal channels of government to government. Now, in foreign bribery, we're alleging that foreign government is accepting bribes in order to get these contracts through. So some of the people who you would have to go through to get permission to seek evidence or gather evidence in these foreign countries were in fact the people who were accused of the crimes, which quickly put a stop to our inquiries in those countries. Domestically, we didn't have any criminals who would come forward and confess, so we gathered evidence off mainly electronic evidence from the companies themselves. We gathered 18 terabytes of data, which was problematic to try to search through, and we had to find new software and so on to try to focus our search on that. International relationships were difficult, so we had, in talking about other government agencies, we had Foreign Affairs, whose primary role is to make friends with all of our foreign countries. Well, we were investigating 25 countries who allegedly took bribes. Quite a few of them, the allegations and evidence went all the way to the head of those countries. And on one hand, you had Foreign Affairs trying to keep diplomatic relations civil with them, and on the other, you had the AFP alleging that they were involved in taking bribes. So that caused quite a bit of heartache between us and Foreign Affairs, whose role of also overseas through their missions is to introduce these foreign officials to our Australian businesses. So they were actually playing a role unintentionally of facilitating the crime, if you like. And also with Austrade, who are in many overseas missions, and their role is to put businesses, to seek opportunities for Australian businesses. And of course, traditionally, this was done through greasing of palms, through paying of bribes, and Austrade were well aware of that and probably didn't do enough to prevent that from happening. And then you've got the media. As I said, we were on the front page every day. I got to a point where I knew that The Age would come out with their next day story at 12 midnight, and I had to stay up at 12:01 to click refresh on the computer because I knew that the powers that be in Canberra would be asking me the next morning, how did they get this story and who have they been talking to, and assuring them that it wasn't a leak from our investigative team. Obviously, the police are banned traditionally from speaking to the media at all. We're very, strict with the rules around that. But at the same time, the media were coming out with information that obviously being supplied by witnesses. These witnesses preferred to go to the media for reasons that I'm not sure, but you'd have to ask them. But we wanted to talk to them ourselves. So we had to work out who sometimes this anonymous information had come from and go and track them down, which led us to need to have a sort of relationship with the media because, of course, they don't reveal their sources. That's rule number one for your average journalist. And rule number one for us is to not talk to them. But in this case, they had information that we needed. They also wanted the AFP to succeed. So it was in their interest to supply some information to us or give us a steer on which direction to head, the investigation to head. So it became mutually beneficial to know a little bit about where they were getting their information from, but not too much to overstep the mark. And of course, we were trying desperately not to tell the media anything that they didn't already know. That culminated in the day before and we were grateful for their assistance, and that we showed that by giving them a heads up the day before the arrests were made, and they were able to prepare their stories for the next morning.
Goodness, Rohan, I mean, and there's investigations and there's investigations. This insight that you've just given us, and this just highlights how many plates that you're spinning running an investigation like this, both locally, internationally, foreign affairs, local media. I'm assuming you were able to tiptoe through that labyrinth, that minefield of opposition and get closer and closer to gathering enough information to lay charges against some within those organisations. Can you just take us to that point where the investigation got to a point where you thought, right, okay, we're good to go here. We can almost switch onto this one and perhaps arrests can be made.
Yeah, as you point out, that did take a long time. It was piecing together little pieces of the jigsaw. We were also working hand in glove with the DPP, who had a large team helping us. And we were always going to not pull the trigger on any arrests until the DPP had given their go-ahead. We'd compiled a massive electronic brief of evidence, which we were showing them and keeping them in the loop all the way along. And finally, when we mutually decided that we'd gathered enough evidence to support a prosecution, we went ahead and arrested 6 people on the first day, and there were several other. All of them were the CEOs and senior management of those 2 companies, and there were others arrested later on. It was pretty difficult. Only one really person ended up providing assistance, who was the agent for security in Indonesia, who admitted that he'd received over $6 million for the purpose of bribing the foreign officials. So the methodology was that they would pay an agent an inflated fee and knowing that part of that money would be then on-spent to foreign officials to encourage them to award the contracts. And that was happening in each and every country.
Now, Rohan, as you get through this, I think the wash-up with regards to entities involved and what have you is, am I right in saying that yourself and your team secured I think it was a $24 million fine against the Reserve Bank? Now, was that linked to them being the parent company of this activity? Is that how that sort of fell into place?
Yeah, the Reserve Bank 50% owned security and 100% owned note print in Australia. But according to Commonwealth law, they are responsible for the actions of the senior management, who we believed to have committed this offence. And the Reserve Bank, trying to avoid perhaps an elongated and ugly court battle, decided that they would plead guilty to those offences. Obviously, you can't put the Reserve Bank in jail, so they didn't have that deterrent aspect, but they were liable for fines, and they paid some huge fines at that time.
So you've got that element of, I guess, what we would call institutional vicarious liability as a term that's sort of used in a situation like this, isn't it? Where an institution is held liable, perhaps for the actions or inactions of individuals. Just those individual perpetrators, you mentioned that there was a number, I think half a dozen or so, possibly more, that were arrested and potentially charged at CEO, CFO level and what have you. Was there any sort of criminal charges upheld against any of those individuals?
No, not in the long run. We went through lengthy court battles, and for a number of reasons, mainly old police would call them technicalities. They were not found guilty in the end, but they did have a very rough time of going through these court proceedings over a number of years. None of them went on to do much work after that. And really what it showed was how difficult it is to actually gather the evidence in a foreign bribery investigation. We ended up probably gathering no evidence from overseas because we got little cooperation, if any. And all of the evidence that we really produced ended up coming from the computers of the companies themselves. And of course, these people aren't silly. They're senior executives. They know that they're committing offences. They know they're doing the wrong thing. So what they put on emails is highly couched in a way so that they're obviously trying to disguise what their true intentions are. And we were trying to interpret and unpack some of what these emails said, but the court didn't agree that with our interpretations of those emails at the end of the day. So really what's happened is that the AFP have moved away from a lot of those long-term investigations, thinking that it's not a great use of their resources and funds, and have spent a lot more time in prevention. There's a thing called the group called the Bribery Prevention Network. It's set up to educate Australian companies on how they can avoid falling into the trap of foreign bribery, and they're doing a lot of excellent work. They set out a template for every Australian company, and now there are offences in the statutes that will prosecute these companies if they don't have these preventative mechanisms in place. So hopefully that's working for us. It certainly saves the AFP from doing these lengthy and expensive investigations.
I'm interested, Rohan, just from a purely from an accountancy perspective, when an entity such as the Reserve Bank in Australia is fined $24 million. That comes out of their funds, obviously. Paid to whom? Because this is it's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because I would look at the Reserve Bank as a sort of a state-owned, federal-owned entity who's been fined $24 million. Who are they paying that fine to? How does that work?
They're basically paying it to themselves, you're right. Consolidated revenue, back to the government. If they could just go to their own company and make another $20 million and pay for it. But no, I think it's more the look of it, that we were making a statement to other companies who were intending to bribe foreign officials. If that happens, that you will need to pay a hefty fine. So that was the purpose of that, as a deterrent to others.
Well, and the optics of that are quite effective, I would think, where I guess if you're sitting on the sidelines watching that and the end result is, goodness me, if the Reserve Bank can be fined $24 million for having a few dodgy dealings from associated companies and what have you, they could come after anybody. So there's a positive optic there. And also, as you said, although individuals involved perhaps escaped custodial sentences or fines themselves, the mud sticks, doesn't it? These are names that have been dragged through the press and associated with this, and perhaps their career paths were somewhat dented as a result.
Severely dented, I would say. And just on the optics, that was really one of the major disappointments of the investigation, because, as you say, if a Reserve Bank's paying multiple millions of dollars, that would be a good news story for the Federal Police to have secured the first foreign bribery conviction as a deterrent to others. But when it came to it, the Australian government, led by Foreign Affairs, got a suppression order granted at the court, and the actual convictions and the fines were hidden from view for several years. So the bang that we were going to get out of that conviction and use it as a deterrent to others was lost by the fact that we were protecting our relationships with foreign officials over the future crimes that might have been committed.
Got to be an element of frustration amongst all that for someone like yourself that put so much. You lost a fair bit of skin in the process, and not perhaps the rosiest outcome for those involved in that investigation.
We all put a lot of effort into that, the whole team. We're really proud of what we did. We tried very, very hard. But we did realise that we were working within an environment where there are consequences, and you need to act on a whole of government level. But at the end of the day, we can look back and say we secured the first foreign bribery convictions, and my career went from there to Canberra, where I oversaw all the other foreign bribery jobs. I went over to the OECD on behalf of Australia and let them know that we were serious and that we had secured convictions, even though it was suppressed back in Australia. But I was able to tell them that we are getting serious about it, and the pressure that was coming on the Australian government was then lifted. So that was quite satisfying.
You know, the timing of this chat is an interesting one. A week or so back, 1st of July, Vapes, sort of a wide sweeping government piece of legislation, vapes have been pretty much outlawed in Australia, with the exception of, I think you can purchase a vape from a pharmacy with a script from a GP. Other than that, they are supposedly no longer to be sold, to be made available. I'm really interested in somebody with your background and the advocacy around this that you're involved with. What's your take on that, on the position on that?
My take is that there's a big gap between the ideals of the health department and the realities of law enforcement. So the health department are desperate for people not to smoke or vape, and so their solution is to just ban these things or prohibit them via the tax in the case of tobacco, and they're prohibiting the access to vapes by making it extremely inconvenient to get them, and even when you do, if you can get them, they're not in the format that the consumers want. So both of them are virtual prohibition policies, and anyone in law enforcement will know that prohibition doesn't work for any of these products. In this country, we've got cocaine is easily available. And any drug that comes from overseas does get through the border if there's a market for it.
Would it be fair to say, and I think you're a person who can answer this with some credibility, would it be alarmist or inaccurate to say, if I was to be in the studio in 12 months, 24 months' time, speaking to, let's say, a current senior investigator within the AFP, that they would be having to devote resources, time and energy into investigating the illicit importation and distribution of vapes as a result of pieces of legislation like this, which, as you said, is done with good intent, but it pushes this below ground and then bounces then back up again, and then we have the AFP having to investigate another form of illicit product. Is that too simple a connection to make, Rohan?
No, that sounds spot on. And if you were talking to an AFP person who'd been forced into investigating this, they'd probably be pretty upset. They're a busy organisation. They've got numerous crime types. They prioritise them on what they see as the risk and perhaps harm to the government, as a harm to the community, as do all of the state police forces. And most of them have come to the conclusion that vapes don't pose a huge harm to the community, and they'd rather not participate in that or add it to their list of responsibilities.
Rohan, I just want to thank you so very much for not only coming into our Melbourne studio to have a chat this morning, but the level of investigation that you're involved in the cases that you spoke about has certainly taken this to another level. I want to thank you for those 24, 25 years service to both the AFP and a shorter time there at Australian Border Force. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for your insight. It's been a great chat.
Thanks, Brent. It's been a pleasure.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a listener original production. It's hosted by me, Brent Sanders, produced by Ed Gooden, and sound designed and imaged by Link Kelly.